1 second, we are just okay. Now, Madam President, if we
hello, everybody who is online, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, scholars, experts, and friends. We are gathered on the electronic airwaves from many lands with many backgrounds for a joyous occasion at a time when the world is seeing so many distressing events happening everywhere. And our daily news can be quite upsetting and distressing with our sympathy for the suffering of others. We are gathered today to celebrate a celebratory occasion, an anniversary, and not any kind of anniversary, but the 880th anniversary of a great poet and sage, the national poet of Azerbaijan, whose name different translators of his literary works have rendered in different manners. A German translator says that his full name was Nizameddin Abu Muhammad Ilyas ibn Yusuf. A French translator of his work says somewhat differently, Abu Muhammad Ilyas ibn Yusuf ibn Mayed, known as Nizamuddin or Nizami. And that is how he is remembered and celebrated by our organization, Nizami Ganjavi, Nizami from the city of Ganja, where he spent most of his life with, I think, a brief trip to some local lord's court, no more. We are gathered to celebrate the literary accomplishments of this man because he's remembered. Nizami is remembered for 5 great epic poems, who made his fame during his time and beyond, but maybe more, even more so, for the values and the ideas that he transmitted, which by our current standards were very much in advance of his time. There are a great many countries where the people belonging to the same religion as he and following supposedly the same holy writ as he have nowhere near the tolerance, the patience with diversity of human nature. Certainly, for somebody who lived in the Middle Ages, he was incomparably more tolerant and more modern in his thought than few people in the Europe of his time. We have the pleasure of having with us today both members of the Nizami Ganjavi International Organization, which has as its motto and its purpose dialogue, mutual understanding, and tolerance. But we're also honored to have among us distinguished scholars of his literary work, because after all, he is remembered for being an absolutely superb lyrical as well, but mostly epical poet. His poems have so many lyrically touching passages that they could have been standalone works of their own. But essentially, these were epic romances or epic, very long epic songs, rather more considerable, many of them, than the chansons de Roland or some of the chansons de geste of the French Middle Ages. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this celebration. And I now pass the airwaves to my dear friend, my very erudite co-chair of NGIC, Dr. Ismail Serageldin.
Madam President, thank you very much. You're very kind. It is my great honor to be with you and to tell our audience that very soon a beautiful book will be issued by President Vaira Vike Freiberga on the greatest of all the epic romances that Nizami wrote, the After Paikar, and I commend it to you. Yes, we are celebrating a truly amazing person, a person who lived by his values, who was promoting openness to the other, promoting non-violence, even looking at women in a well-rounded view, where his princesses were not just beautiful, but they were also intelligent and many of them educated and so on, which, as we said, for the 12th century is an important way of reminding ourselves of a history that wasn't there. Today, we will celebrate his genius in this 880th anniversary by looking at three distinct facets of his many contributions. His concern with ethical values and social justice, and the road to wisdom, where he actually describes how, in order to acquire the wisdom from all the wise of all the cultures of the world, not limiting yourself to one place, you first have to crush your ego and make yourself as to dust under the feet of the wise from all the traditions of the world. And of course, especially given all we're hearing about what's happening in Afghanistan, I think it is very important that we will hear and have a session about his depiction and his understanding of the role of women, which is, again, in his day, remarkable. In each session, we'll have a keynote address followed by remarks by some distinguished discussants, followed by a more general Q&A session. And we hope that by the end of the day, we will have brought even greater public appreciation to the memory and legacy of the great Azerbaijani poet. And I'm very proud that we have one of the greatest scholars of Nizami with us, Professor Christine van Rumbeck, and she will be leading the middle session. So let me turn to her right now.
Thank you very much, President Vike Freiberga, Dr. Serageldin, for these lovely introductions. As an academic, it's a great pleasure to be part of this ceremony and this anniversary of the wonderful Nizami. Nizami is what we call a classic author. For more than 800 years now, he has been in dialogue with crowds of people, of readers, who could profit from his thoughts. And today still, he is addressing our times with a relevance which he probably could not have anticipated. Nizami's poems stand here in all their native artistic plurality. In our 21st century, they are liberated, they are free, they're not extinguished by the death of the writer, by the death of the innumerable readers that precede us. The poems have miraculously remained unaffected by time, yet they're constantly offering themselves to be read under each reader's particular temporal disposition. The work proposes, the reader disposes. Nizami's narratives, his thoughts, his verses challenge us, and at the same time, Nizami is an author with very wide shoulders. He is bottomless. There are enough pearls in the ocean of his khamse, of his 5 great poems, for each of us divers to emerge with a handful of priceless gifts, priceless pearls that he has apparently kept specially for us. Each of these pearls is different in shape, in color, in form for each different reader, each different situation. Such universality only happens with the greatest of texts in the world of literature throughout centuries. And we can really speak of the miracle of Nizami's poetry. Our conference today, organized by the Nizami Ganjavi International Center in Baku, is a fantastic opportunity to test the almost miraculous relevance of Nizami's poems on the three themes which Dr. Serageldin has been talking about: the ethical values and social justice, women as teachers, as leaders, and wisdom, the acquisition of it and its relevance to governing today. As an academic, I am particularly excited to share insights and thoughts on Nizami's works with panels of very distinguished discussants who mostly have been confronted themselves with the reality of governance and who can read Nizami with the background of their own practical experience. So I'm really very, very much looking forward to today's discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Rumbeki, Madam President, Co-Chair, and Dr. Ismail Serageldin. Now, it was a great pleasure. We are turning to our first panel, which is ethical values on social justice, which was a keynote speaker of Dr. Ismail Serageldin, and with a speech of Dr. Abdulaziz Altwaishi and Ikmelettin Ihsanoğlu, former Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Countries, and a video message from President Emil Constantinescu. Dr. Ismail Serageldin, the floor is yours. The screen is yours.
The screen indeed. Well, let me start with a few words about Nizami, the man, the genius, the poet, the sage. He showed how you can go from the specific Azerbaijani tradition in Ganja to the universal, and how culture-specific writing and characters can appeal to all of humanity. Steeped in local folklore, he transcended it to produce some of the greatest lyrical and epic poetry of the world. Educated locally, he became an acknowledged sage of his era, renowned for his vast knowledge of almost every subject. Brought up on the local language and dialect, through his writing and poetry, he became one of the greatest contributors to the Persian language and to world literature. He was not a court poet, as Madam President has said at the opening. He was really a man of the people. He does not appear in the annals of the tazkiras, as they were called, where the court poets were jealous of his talent. But if the court poets and chroniclers would have him out of the records of the courts, he certainly lived in the hearts of the people. And today, the world bears witness to his genius and his immense erudition. I was struck that in a recent biography, he is credited with a prodigious knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, astrology, alchemy, medicine, botany, Quranic exegesis, Islamic theory and law, Sharia law, Persian myth and legends, history, ethics, philosophy, and esoteric thought, music, and even the visual arts. So that's quite an amazing range of interests for someone who spent almost all his life in Ganja. He was a bridge builder through time and space. He helped to connect the Persian cultural heritage, moving seamlessly between its pre-Islamic legacy and its dynasty Islamic tradition. However, although he emphasized the value of his religious legacy, he was always promoting moderation and was opposed to any extreme religious positions. And further, his work transcended not only the Persian cultural heritage, but connected with the Arabic traditions and of other Muslim people of his time. He drew on the enormous work of Firdausi in the Shahnama, but also in Asfahani and others. But so did Shakespeare draw on Holinshead to write his great historical plays. That is not an issue at all. In fact, the creations that he gave, as Professor Van Rompuy said at the beginning, make him truly a great poet, worthy of being recognized. But other scholars have also added that he was a genuine social reformer, as MacDonald has pointed out. So what social reforms are we talking about? Well, social norms and individual values make a society function. They provide the trust, the glue that holds a society together and make transactions possible. Our belief in justice, equality, and fairness, and having institutions that ensure as much of that as possible are part of the framework that holds us together. values we live by and values we judge with also give meaning to such abstract concepts as truth, goodness, beauty. And Nizami addressed many of these issues, and these words have import today. He advocated above all nonviolence. He believed in peace and nonviolence. And looking back at his own life, he could observe, for as long as I have lived, never in violent way has the wing of a fly been bent, never mixed dregs in another's fresh water, sought to disturb another conditions, never. But he went further, because not only did he advocate not doing harm to one's enemies, but also the best way to use one's short time on this earth is to build with kindness and friendship. From dusk to dawn, for life to stay is hopeless. Only the seed worth growing is the seed of goodness. And in that, he was also concerned with justice. He considers justice the primary quality that a good ruler should be devoted to. It comes out from the way some of the stories recounted by the 7 beauties in the Haft-Paikar subtly instruct Bahram Gur in the importance of justice. But perhaps nowhere does it come out more forcefully than in the chapter in the Makhzan al-Asrar, the storehouse of the mysteries, in the story of the king and his minister coming upon 2 owls looking on the ruined village and hooting to each other, and whereby the minister translates what they are saying to each other for the ruler. And he says, the sound they make isn't the song of calling for a mate. It is really the question of a betrothal that they debate. That bird gave her daughter to this one, and now asks him for a proper portion of a dowry to allow the union, saying, this ruined village, give to me, and some others as well, perhaps 2 or 3. And the other one says, let it be. Our rulers leave to pursue injustice again, and they don't grieve. And if only one worthy monarch should happen to live, 100,000 ruined homes I would happily give. So justice can be the quality that Nizami attributes to wise rulers. And but can justice be enforced by mechanical application of the law, any law? I do not believe so. For social justice is a concept that can provide multiple answers depending on the mental framework or ideology that is brought to bear on the question at hand. So let me give you a parable. It is a story that I owe to my friend Amartya Sen. And you meet 3 children with a flute, and they ask you to help them decide who should get the flute. So the first child says that she is a talented musician. She enjoys playing the flute. The other 2 have no musical abilities at all. And they enjoy listening to her play. And the facts are not contested. Thus, it is perhaps fair to let the talented child have the flute, and everybody will be happy listening to beautiful music. Now consider the same 3 children, but the second child is poor and has no toys, while the other 2 are rich and have many toys. And the only possible toy he could get would be this flute. Again, the facts are not contested. So a sense of fairness suggests that he should get the flute. Now let's consider the third scenario, again, where the facts are not contested. The third child contends that even if the first is talented and the second is poor, she is the one who made the flute. She took the reed and made the holes and turned it into a flute. Surely it is only fair that she should get the result of her own work. Now what we have here are some, and only some, of the criteria of social choice. What technically we would call utility in the first case, equity in the second, and entitlement in the third. And all social problems and policies involve a mix of these dimensions. And choosing in a fair way has a lot to do with how society values these different dimensions and weighs them in particular moments in the history of that society. To redress past injustices, it may well be necessary to put the emphasis on one or another. We do that when we create quotas, for example. But clarity in the political debate, lucidity in our social intercourse would be needed for all of that. But how do we get there? Well, we get there by emphasizing freedom, equality, and the rule of law. And in fact, Nelson Mandela defined freedom with a sense that adds responsibility and duty. And he says, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. So the pursuit for social justice, rather than absolute equality, is more reasonable. But even that will require the ability of citizens to exercise their fundamental human rights. And in turn, we may need to take into account the innate inequalities among people. The word equality, it keeps coming back. And we say equality before the law is but a start. Some people would see fairness as the provision of equal opportunities only, whatever the results will be. But if the result is to have some who are extremely rich and some who are extremely poor, so be it. But others, most of us in fact, will see that a society where wealth is concentrated in the hands of very few people, while the vast majority suffer in poverty and destitution, is inherently unfair. Wealth, enormous wealth, that makes a mockery of measures of inequality is based on greed, and no amount of wealth is considered enough. And extreme inequality is corrosive. It hardens the attitude of the rich and powerful towards the poor and lowly. It builds acceptance of the incongruity of wealth amidst misery and exclusion. And Goldsmith said, ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Indeed, recent studies, even by the IMF, have confirmed our suspicions that far from being a necessary corollary to compensate the talented and the inventive, those forces in society that propel society forward, excessive inequality was inefficient and was associated with a variety of social ills. So what does Nizami have to say about this? Well, he strikes at the root of the problem by addressing the issue of greed. And he advocated leading a virtuous life without greed. And he says, in your village, upon your own private estate, don't think of eating from another's plate. Fortune will turn upon the unthinking fellow whose foot beyond his garment will allow. And the law, and in this case, Sharia law, deserves special mention at this time when the Taliban have behaved in a way that equated it with brutal punishments. Actually, the history of Sharia is very different. And I will use as a starting benchmark an amazing document that I commend to those who are interested to know more about it. The second caliph after the death of the Prophet Muhammad was Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he wrote a letter to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari appointing him as a qadi or a judge, and in which he tells him how to be a judge. And he gives him not only to treat everybody equally before the law, but it is so progressive, it is unthinkable that this was in the 7th century, 639 AD, 1,000 years before the trial of Galileo in 1630, almost 30,000 years. So he talks of the presumption of innocence, that the burden of proof is on the accuser. The accused has only to deny under oath. He talks of equality before the law. He talks about the right of the accused to confront the accuser in a court of law. And he also points out a justice that is not fast is not just, for the rich can afford to wait, but the poor cannot. And then he adds, and don't let your ego get in the way. If upon reflection you find that maybe that was not the best decision, don't be afraid to change your decision in front of people, because it is more important to ensure that no injustice is committed. But beyond that particular letter, there are two other major events that we need to point out. One is a case that is again so fresh and contemporary that evidence gathered illegally is not acceptable as evidence. Now, of course, these are my words, but fundamentally the case was someone who jumped over a fence and peeked in somebody's house and said he saw him drinking and becoming drunk. And he went to accuse him to Omar in Medina at the time. And Omar said, but you're not supposed to jump over the fence and go and peek into his house. And he said, yes, but the main thing is that he was drinking, and that is forbidden. And to which Omar said, no, you cannot break the law in the name of protecting the law. Now, this was pretty radical, I would say, at a great start for the tolerance that we will find later on. But the final and most important thing that Omar did was a case where we have a verse in the Quran, in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 60, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم. This is a category of people who are able to receive support from the treasury. And these were tribes that took a neutral position between the Muslims and Quraysh in the early wars between the Prophet and his followers against the Qurayshites, or some people who had embraced Islam but lived in a tribe where they were being persecuted for being Muslim. And it was therefore, it's a straight text in the Quran, followed by the tradition of the Prophet. And Omar, 3.5 years after the death of the Prophet, said, conditions have changed. I am not going to give any parts of the treasury to the mu'allafati qulubahum, this category of people. I will give it only to the poor and the destitute and the other categories that are listed. And we asked him how, and he said, the world has changed. The world has changed. We were 100 people standing alone in Badr. Now, Islam has become a vast empire. He had seen the expansion. Those who want protection can come and live under our protection. Those who want to wage war, let them wage war. But the poor and the destitute are the ones we must reach. Now, if he could say that within a few years of the death of the Prophet, what do you think he would say 1400 years later about how to deal with scripture and precedent? And actually, we find this even among the most conservative and difficult school of students, the Hanbali school, where Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, from the 13th century, so almost contemporary with Nizami, just after him, and the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, he said in his book, informing the signatories on the authority of the Lord, Sharia is based on wisdom and seeking the interests of the people in this life and the next. It is all justice, all mercy, all benefit, and all wisdom. And anything that departs from justice to injustice, from mercy to its opposite, from benefit to evil, and from wisdom to absurdity is not part of the Sharia, even if it has been included in it by the skillful interpretation of scholars, at-ta'wil, as we would say. So you see this tradition going on, and in fact, the result of that was a relative openness and tolerance when contrasted to the Inquisition in Europe. The Muslims at the Middle Ages, at the time of Nizami, also allowed great advances in science during the Middle Ages. There were occasional confrontations, sometimes imprisonment, very rare executions did occur. Al-Hallaj, in the end of the 9th century, became a martyr, but really that was more because of the politics of the Abbasid state. In the 10th century, Ibn al-Haytham, again, to bring a reminder of the difference in how the reaction in Sharia was compared to Catholic Europe, Ibn al-Haytham rejected the Aristotelian authority and embraced empirical research centuries before Bacon, Descartes, and Galileo, and nobody troubled him. And you listen to people like Ibn al-Haytham, Khwarizmi, Omar Khayyam, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, all of them. It's amazing how modern they sound and how powerful their voices are. And listen to Ibn Nafis. He's slightly after Nizami, 13th century. The key point is the importance of listening to the contrarian view. And he says, when hearing something unusual, do not preemptively reject it, for that would be folly. The Arabic word is taish. Indeed, horrible things may be true, and familiar and praised things may prove to be lies. Truth is truth unto itself, not because many people say it is. Now, these are stellar lights, and they, like Nizami, were open to the other. They got from India the decimal numbers and the zero, added algebra, and passed on this treasure to the West. They are our forebears, and we should be proud disciples and remember this great tradition. It is indeed our tradition, our history, and our legacy. And worthy of note, and this is really extreme, is that this tolerance was general, not just related to the scientific world. Contemporary to Ibn al-Haytham in Egypt, 10th century now, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri lived in Syria. Al-Ma'arri, a giant of Arabic literature, was blind, and he lived in the village between Aleppo and Damascus. And he wrote poetry attacking religion, attacking God, attacking the prophets, attacking the holy books. And he was not punished for it, even though it generated a certain amount of opprobrium. His work was not only published and known in his own time, it has arrived down to us in the 21st century without loss. Even more, he was appreciated for his talent as a poet and a linguist, even by those who totally rejected his heretical writings. So they would say, I disagree with Abu al-Ala about his religious views, but he is an inspired poet and a learned linguist. And occasionally, yes, we do recognize that martyrs did exist, like al-Hallaj, but they are few and far between. Now, Nizami was aware of this tradition. As a Hakim, he had certainly studied all those who preceded him and certainly contributed to those who came after him. And so we find him encouraging his son Muhammad to study the law, but to avoid using it for trickery that serves the purposes of the powers that be. So let the law instruct you in good service, let it not teach you how to lie. But if Nizami rejected the court and its sycophancy and its political intrigues, what did he imagine instead of that? And I think what he wanted was people to live by their principles of peace and non-violence. And in looking back at his own life, he could observe, for as long as I have lived, never in violent way has the wing of a fly been bent, never mixed dregs in another fresh water, sought to disturb another condition, never. And he was open to all the cultures of his time. And he told all to be open to all the cultures of the world, that they would benefit enormously from such openness. In the Iskandar-Nama, he researched in all the tongues and found pearls and gems of wisdom that he collected and polished with his poetry. And he says, from every manuscript some worth came to me, I found and embellished it with jewels of poetry. I filled up my store from the more recent history, the Jewish and to the Pahlavi. I took from every grain that which was excellent, and from every pod the innermost kernel went. I joined the riches of one tongue to those of another, and the mass into a complete whole did I gather. And beyond his poetry, his famous epic masterpieces, he also wrote many other beautiful poems. And his death in the beginning of the 13th century, 1209, would leave a void in the world of literature, but he bequeathed to all of us an enormous legacy. And to those who want wisdom, he recommended that they choose the profound and mystical path of spiritual enlightenment, but he warned that it requires the crushing of one's ego to seek the higher truth, to make oneself as dust under the shoes of the great and wise from all the traditions of the world. But that's a topic for the next panel that we will have today. And we talked about pluralism, but beyond pluralism lies the question of equality, and most critical issue in societies generally is still gender equality, and especially in Eastern society. And here it's important to remind ourselves that Nizami was writing over 800 years ago, but there too he surprises us. Nizami portrayed women as full-blooded creatures, well-rounded, educated, intelligent, as well as beautiful. who evolved over time and who could be the equal of man in every way, even in the most unusual, such as physical strength. We will be having a separate panel devoted to this topic. So conclusions, what more can we say about Nizami? We can say that he lived in consonance with his principles, that he was kind and loving, and as Shakespeare said, this above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, that thou canst not then be false to any man. Nizami lives on, and Azerbaijan is right to be proud of this great poet and sage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ismail, for amazing speech and information. You know, you are one of the few persons. I was reading in the book of Madam President Vaira Freiberg also, that referring many times to your works that you have done on research of Nizami. Now, with the allowance, I would like to ask Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Twaishri, former Director General of ISESCO.
Good morning, our co-chair and our Secretary General and all our participants, the respected intellectuals who are present in this beautiful early morning web conference about Nizami Ganjavi, the great poet, the great sage, the man who lived for life and for human dignity. But what can I say after this wonderful, very eloquent, highly orchestrated presentation by our co-chair, Mr. Ismail Sirajuddin? He took all the words from my mind and mouth. But I will dare to come up with some small things that will be nothing compared to what Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin has just said, which is really a brilliant piece of academic work. Nizami Ganjavi, as a human personality who had no national borders, because he lived for humanity at large and addressed all his wisdom and works to consolidate and disseminate the values of peace, of tolerance, of understanding, of respecting diversity, and opened many venues for the generations to learn from his wisdom and from his very fine spirit of humanity. As you all know, he lived in a very difficult time, but he was not aligned with the authorities, praising them or serving them. He was free in his mind and in his works. And they called him the poet of the people, not the poet of the rulers. And this is a very, very important aspect of his personality, because he spoke his mind. He was not under the influence of the authorities, of the rulers, of the authorities of the politics, but he was under the authority of his mind, of his beliefs, of how he looks at life and people at all the parts of the globe, because he considered himself a preacher of truth and love and peace. He was not a person who would confine himself in his geographical borders and political environment. And this was praised by the biographers of his time and those who came after him, and also the great poets of his time and who came after him. They looked at him as one of the greatest poets and wise people, and his works have lived and will live for a long time. I read some of his works. Of course, I read the Arabic translations, but I wish I could have mastered the Persian language, so I can dive deep in the meanings of his work. But the translations were fine. They gave us a very complete or semi-complete picture of what he wanted to say. And I was really amazed by his ability to refine the statements and the words and to put the lyrics and the poetry in such a very fluid and a musical pattern that attracts the listener or the reader. So he is really a man of his time, and he will live for other times. And now we are praising him after 880 years in this year of remembering Nizami Ganjavi. And the next generations, I am sure, will do the same, and will discover many other things, that we haven't seen in his, works, and in his human insight and human feelings toward people all over the world, whatever their religion may be, or their, national identity, or language, or color, whatever. So to go to the questions that have been addressed in this panel, justice, as I can see in the works of Nizami Ganjavi, and as I believe in it, justice is an open notion. You cannot define justice according to your own interest, or your own political affiliation, or your religious beliefs. No, justice is an open and highly revered concept. It is the utmost mercy of God for his creation, the people of the earth, that they should treat each other with justice as God wanted, not as we want, because God are merciful, and justice should be merciful as well. So when we put justice according to our legal systems, or our political systems, or our desires, then we will kill the spirit of justice here. Nizami Ganjavi transcends this. He gave us the real meaning of justice. It is for respecting human dignity. And when we respect human dignity, we respect the creator of this human being. And this is the ultimate understanding of justice. Now we can see, as our Professor Ismail Sirajuddin mentioned, the agonies of many people all over the world. And the world order is incapable of solving the problems of those, suffering nations. And the latest is the Afghani situation. It is really a black stain in the face of humanity, that we cannot work to make people happy and free and give them justice that they deserve. But this is an issue that has to be discussed in different, sessions. But the parameters and the borders and the rules of justice cannot be put by human beings. Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin mentioned the verse in the Quran that Umar ibn Khattab, the second caliph, interpreted one part of it, which is the al-mu'allafati qulubum, the people that you have to attract and include in your society, in your system, by paying them some of the zakat. And the zakat is 2.5% of your income. So this verse in its totality is a message to implement economic and social justice, because the rich will give those who have not, and they have been categorized. The poor, those who have their sufficient thing for one day, those who are in debt, those who are in the way, they don't have anything, they're just traveling from one place to other, like the refugees. And that the people whom you want to, attract to you and help them and lift them from the bad situations and the difficult situations in which they live. So this is the order of God. This is the justice of God. Do we do it now? I mean, there are many rich countries and many rich people, millionaires and billionaires. They have, great amounts of money in the banks, in investments, in their, banks and investments, and everywhere they have money. Do they pay the 2.5% of their income? I mean, this is just a little thing. If you have $1 million and you pay only 2,500 of it per year, what about those who have trillions? If they pay this kind of justice in your income, then you will cover millions and hundreds of millions of poor people who are in need. And this is justice. And it is something that doesn't hurt you, but it helps others. So we cannot put borders and lines and rules for justice. Justice itself is an open concept, but it means that we help and extend our assistance to those who are in need, wherever they may be, whatever they may be. Law is important in any society, and law is a production of justice, and also it achieves justice in the final analysis. And if there is no law, there is no order, and if there is no order, there is chaos and injustice. So we have to respect the law, and the law that we would like to see, implemented in the whole world is the law of justice, not the law of interest. Because people, design law according to their own interest. If this serves me, it is a law. If it doesn't serve me, no, this is not law. No, this is not the concept. Law is for justice and not for interest. And the agonies of many nations and the many wars and many animosity and hatred and phobias that is spreading and making our life very difficult and very miserable and ugly is because we don't know how to implement the just law. If we implement the just law, then we will live, all of us, in happiness and in prosperity. Thirdly, diversity is necessary because we are created diverse. We are not one solid body. Has the similarities, all the similarities wherever you may go. No, we have been created different. And this is stated in our holy book, the Quran, that Allah created people different, because the diversity is a sign of the universe, one of the signs of God in the universe. And we have to respect it. We cannot force people to be like us, and they cannot force us to be like them. But we have to respect each other. So mutual respect within respecting the cultural and religious diversity and the racial diversity is important, because this preserves the stability and the peace and order and security in the world. So in any country, we have to respect diversity. In the whole world, we have to respect diversity. And this is a precondition for understanding, for cooperating, for coexisting. To do this, then we will fight all forms of segregation, inequality, division, preference, prejudices. This is the whole concept. And I will go back and say that I'm sorry I came late, because I was aware that we will start 30 minutes later because of the time in Morocco. But luckily I caught you. But I would go back and talk to the speech of our dearly friend Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin. This piece is really a masterpiece. It has to be written, translated, and we have to disseminate it, because his speech shows who Nizami Ganjavi is, what his message is, what we should do to benefit from it in our world today. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdulaziz, so much. ISESCO, under your leadership, always been a crucial supporter for research and for the bringing up to the world the legacy of Nizami Ganjavi. Before going to our dear friend, Dr. Emil, I would like just to say our gratitude to Ms. Sevil. She's a member of the Parliament of Azerbaijan, and also they've been supporting us. Trend News Agency is the biggest news agency in Azerbaijan, live broadcasting entire our recent activities, and especially this conference in 3 languages. That's why our deep gratitude. And Dr. Ihsanoğlu, please, can you unmute?
Please unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Dr. Ekmeleddin. Now, okay.
It's okay.
Now,
Good morning,
yes.
dear colleagues, Madam Chairman, co-chairs, Secretary General. I do apologize for being late because my agenda today was a little bit mixed up. I had to be vaccinated, and I'm sorry I did not reach at the beginning of this session, but I enjoyed very much so the great lecture or the erudite explanation of Dr. Sirajuddin about Nizami Ganjavi. I thought that he's an authority on Shakespeare only, but it seems that he is authority on Shakespeare and Nizami Ganjavi as well. And of course, the nice talk made by Dr. Tuwejri. I think I will take you out of these great high levels of erudition to present you a more modest picture of Nizami Ganjavi. Because 30 years ago, UNESCO declared the year 1991 as the year of Nizami Ganjavi. That year coincided with the 850th anniversary of the great Azeri poet's birthday. Nizami, born in Ganja and received his good education there, as besides basic education courses, he had interest in studying astronomy, philosophy, geography, medicine, music, and mathematics, in addition to languages and literature. Meanwhile, he learned languages such as Pahlavi, Syriac, Hebrew, Armenian, and Georgian, besides, of course, Persian, Arabic, and of course, his mother tongue, Azeri, Turkish. After the education period, Nizami did not take on an official duty and lived on the money he received from the poems he sent to the patrons in the region. Among who these patrons we can mention Seljuk ruler, Tuğrul II, one of the Atabegs of Azerbaijan, Nasreddin Cihan Pehlivan bin Ildeniz, Kızıl Arslan, the ruler of Maraga, Alaaddin Körpe Arslan, the ruler of Erzincan, Mengucek, Melik Fahrettin Behram Shah, and the Atabek of Mosul, Izzeddin Mesud bin Aslan Shah. Those were the people or the rulers, patrons, who he attributed his poems or submitted them, and he would receive remuneration for that. But he was not a court poet. He refused to be a court poet and preferred a modest life instead of being in the closed circle of rulers, emirs, or notables. So he was respected by both the rulers, the people, as well as his peers, the poets. He was influenced by Firdevsi and Sanai Ghaznavi, and he became an example for more poets in Persian and Turkish literature. Among them, great poets who had their marks on their times and for centuries follow until today, such as Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, Saadi Shirazi, Hafiz Shirazi, Fuzuli, Molla Jami, and Amir Husravi Dehlavi, to mention some. Nizami not only carried great Iranian Firdevsi's epic poetry genre to the top, but also won the title of the greatest masters of love stories written in verse style, and achieved in the honor of being the founder of Hamsa genre in Persian literature. Hamsa means a set of poets, 5 works in the Masnavi style, 5 poems in Masnavi style. For Masnavi, let me say that this means Islamic Islamic literature tradition. Masnavi means a poetry composed in rhymed couplets, each couplet being of a different rhyme, but of the whole of 1 meter. This is Masnavi. So he wrote 5 poems in Masnavi style. His eloquence in techniques of handling the subjects, his power of expression, finding new meanings and metaphors, giving importance to aesthetics in expression, strong descriptions, his depth analysis on soul, vastness of his imagination, brightness and cultural richness in his style played a role in his recognition as the greatest poet of Persian literature. While expressing events, concepts, and emotions, each couplet presents a unity and beauty in itself, as it uses literary arts and places them in a rich context. As some of the concepts and compositions that he put forward for the first time make it difficult to understand his works, that is why they need a special analysis and in-depth explanations. I think we had good example today of Dr. Sirajuddin's interpretation of some of his poetry. The only work of Nizami that has survived to the present day is Khamsa. It is accepted that the work, also known as Panch Ganj, and consisting of approximately 35,000 couplets, took 35 to 40 years to complete. Khamsa, the brightest example of its kind in Persian literature, set an example for poets who wrote in this field, and poets such as Emir Khusrawi Dehlavi, Shamsuddin Kitabi Nishaburi, Mullah Abdurrahman Jami, Faizi Hindi, Haji Kirmani wrote poets after him. The work, which has hundreds of manuscripts in various libraries, has been published many times in Azerbaijan, in Turkey, in Iran, in India, and in Europe, and its verses and prose translation has been made. The 5 Masnawis in the Khamsa are as following. The first, Mahzanul Asrar, the treasure of the house of mysteries. It was written in years 1174 or 1176 in the honor of Erzincan ruler Fahreddin Behram Shah from the Mangujak dynasty. It consists of 2,400 couplets. Nizami, who received an important reward, Jaizeh, from Behram Shah in return for his work, was inspired by the mystical Masnawi Hadikatul Hakika of Sanai Ghaznali Sanai. The treasure of the House of Mysteries has inspired many Turkish and Persian poets translated to Turkish, English, Russian, and French. Second part of the Khamsa, Khusrawi Shirin. This Masnawi was written in 10 years, was completed in 1180 or 1181. The number of couplets varies between 5,700 and 5,700 or 7,700, depending on the copies studied. In the work, the love story of Sassanid ruler Khusrav Perviz and Princess Shirin is told. The Masnawi, which was turned into kind of romance novel with the analysis of strong love feelings, created a literature genre which similar ones would be written later on. It has been translated into Turkish, French, Russian, German, and Japanese. Third book of Khamsa, Layla-i Majnun. It contains about 5,000 couplets. It was written in less than 4 months at the request of Shirwan Shah Jalal al-Dawla Ahistan in 1188. The Nizami style, which takes its subject from Arabic literature, but puts the heroes in Iranian identity, has produced his most successful work within this fiction and expression. After 3 centuries, Fuzuli's Masnawi Leyla-i Mecnun in Turkish set another high standard for this love poem. It has been translated, Nizami's Leyla-i Mecnun, translated into Turkish, English, Russian, and of course, nowadays, Azerbaijani Turkish. 4. Haft Pikar, or also known as Behram Name. It was written at the request of Alauddin Kirpa Aslan, the ruler of Maraga in 1197, and dedicated to him. In this work, the hunting entertainments of the Sassanid ruler, Behram Gur, his family life, and the stories were narrated by his 7 wives are discussed. The poet's mastery of storytelling and his wide imagination reached their climax in this Masnavi. It has been translated into English, Russian, and Italian. 5. Iskandername. It consists of 2 parts titled Sharafname, written in 12:1, and Iqbalname, written in 12:11. The first part consists of approximately 10,000 couplets. Here, Alexander's lineage is going to the end of darkness. His return to home and his conquests are mentioned. In the second part, which is around 3,700 couplets, Alexander is presented mostly as a philosopher and prophet. In this chapter, which deals with the deep philosophical issues, Nizami's knowledge, vast culture, and high expression power draw attention. It has been translated into English, Russian, and German. Apart from this Hamsa, although it is mentioned in the sources that Nizami has a diwan, that is to say, a standard collection of poems consisting of 20,000 couplets, a complete copy of this diwan did not survive to the day present. According to scholars of Nizami Ganjavi, they consider him as one of the giants of Persian literary tradition. As a poet, he stands between Abul Qasim Firdawsi, the poet of Iran's heroic tradition and the author of Shahnameh, Book of the Kings. He stands between Firdawsi and Jalaluddin Rumi, whose Diwan-i-Kabir, the great Diwan, and Kitab-i Masnavi, Ma'navi, virtually defines the forms of mystical lyric and mystical narrative poetry, respectively. Nizami's poetry is more comprehensive than that of either Firdawsi or Jalaluddin Rumi. It includes the romantic dimensions of human relations, as well as the heroic, and plumps the human psyche with an unprecedented depth and understanding. Nizami Ganjavi, the great Azeri poet, who was born in Ganja and spent his life in South Caucasus in the second half of the 12th century, calling his descendants and the humanity at large from more than 800 years back in a comprehensive manner and truly universal spirit. And I quote, "As the pen began its first movement, it produced first word and speech. When they raised the curtain of the non-existence, the first manifestation was word and speech. Until the word gave voice to the heart, the soul did not submit its free body to clay." From the treasure of the House of Mysteries. Today, I'm glad to observe that Nizami Ganjavi Foundation, being successfully inspired by the universal message of the great Azeri intellectual and poet, has managed to translate these great ideas into international programs and projects, and has dedicated their work to build a dialogue and understanding between cultures and peoples for building functional and inclusive society. I would like to conclude my words by quoting some aphorisms by the founder of modern Azerbaijan, great leader late Haydar Aliyev, whom I had the pleasure and honor of working and cooperating with him. Late President Haydar Aliyev says, and I quote, "Every human being should find his place in life, but its right place, the place worthy of him. Every human being should find his place in life, but his right place, the place worthy of him." Second quotation, "Morals have always united people, as morals are more superior than other basics." Last one, "Everyone needs to be able to respect others' ideas and benefit from them." Thank you for listening.
Your Excellency Dr. Hikmet Insanoğlu, thank you so much. We will definitely going to send you the book of Madam President Vaidevika Freiberg as well, and I'm sure that you will love it with the book of Dr. İsmail Sarageldin. Now we do have a video message from President Emil Constantinescu, a former president of Romania, who couldn't be joining personally, but he recorded his video message. With permission.
Confronting with the absence of interpersonal relations. Dear friends, I would like to talk to you today about a minority on the verge of extinction, the sage. Around the mid-20th century, cognitive psychology identified the social phenomenon present predominantly in the mental universe of teenagers and fiction writers, taking the form of the character known as an imaginary friend. Subjected to heightened stress caused by the isolation imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, many people confronted with the absence of interpersonal relations, lost in the external physical reality, felt the need for such an imaginary friend. Such an imaginary friend could well have been Nizami Ganjavi, known almost 9 centuries ago as Hakim, the wise. And I must confess that one of the driving motivations behind my participation in this conference was the fact that one entire session was dedicated to the road to wisdom. It was only a few months ago that we met online for a discussion dedicated to the cultural legacy Nizami Ganjavi left behind, when I raised a rhetorical interrogation. What would Nizami Ganjavi have thought of the year 2021? In what follows, I propose an exercise of the imagination. Let us transport Nizami into the 21st century. I believe that once our contemporary, the philosopher of a long lost world, would have been very attentive to people and surroundings. He would rejoice to see that so many people are literate, and that in the 21st century, intelligent women, not necessarily named Layla, have access to knowledge in equal measure to their male counterparts. He would, however, bemoan the fact that so few truly understand what they are reading. He would appreciate that people now enjoy many more material means of overcoming their condition. But we would have also been shaken to see how easily individuals bereft of culture and morals can take the reins of power. I do not know whether Nizami Ganjavi would have led a university department or taken up a decision-making position within public administration. Most likely not. Yet I believe he would have been happy to use Facebook, Instagram, and Zoom. I imagine he would have had a YouTube channel that we have garnered millions of likes. I already saw that the Beethoven Symphony, uploaded several years ago, has gathered no less than 34 million views. For with globalization, the elites, a minority by definition, can become better known. However, how many members of his audience would truly have followed Ganjavi's ideas? Probably very few. Those who could resist the temptation of power, fame, and of petty egos. Excellence is a bolster to mediocrity. Without a doubt, there would be some, even some colleagues, that would wish that Nizami lose credibility. And it is not beyond comprehension that slender of stories which have surfaced around him and false evidence fabricated in order to undermine his prestige, to lower it to their level. In order to be understood, Nizami would likely have also spoken English as we are all today. And if he were to be considered an influencer, his speech would be translated into all of the world's languages. Gifted PR team would advise him to only offer the world his wisdom little by little, in bite-sized morsels, rapid and attractive packaging, through short TikTok messages, and ripples of wisdom posted daily on social networks. Many would probably fail to truly understand him, but after skimming over his musing on ideas and of life itself, perhaps the hearts of some would blossom. In this illusion of absolute freedom amplified by his virtual life, man today, and here I'm not only referring to those in the Western world, has lost his bearing and roots and lives as a creature of the skies, suspended between the heavens and the earth, most often incapable to define his true dreams and aspirations, but ever eager that the world around him change to be able to encompass him. In the Middle Ages, life conditions were much more precarious than they are today. and yet people better understood their purpose in life and shared certain thought and behavioral patterns that kept them firmly anchored in their world. It was also an age of darkness, but visible in mere light in all its cruelty. Today, darkness has not disappeared, but rather has merely hidden. The words of the Nizami Ganjavi uttered today would show people how not to fear. While the story of Majnun and Layla would teach us to look through eyes capable of seeing the beauty hidden in every individual. In a world in which, from its very beginnings, interpersonal relations were predicated on power, whether in a political, military, religious, or material sense, the sage, although not always wielding it directly, has nevertheless always played an enlightened role. He counterbalances divine power, which in turn counterbalances political power. His role is to offer a vision of an administration predicated on meritocracy and a strategy for the coherent development of society at large. Perhaps terrified of the enormous expectation of the 21st century people, Nizami Ganjavi would have withdrawn from public life, accompanied only by a few chosen disciplines. And we have begun to pen his works in a hope that at some point, some other souls living centuries into the future would be just as thirsty for love, for peace, and beauty as he was. For wisdom is not lost in the passing of any particular sage, but rather travels like light through the centuries. Contemporary postmodern society is tackling the rescue of plant and animal species threatened with extinction, the conservation of our natural and immaterial heritage, and the safeguarding of the rights of minorities with laudable passion and abnegation. Unfortunately, I have yet to see much unease as the threat of the extinction of a global minority once held in high esteem, namely the sages. After all, why would we need wisdom and sages either during, prior to, or after the consummation of a crisis? Now that we have so many specialists, investigative and communication techniques, when we can quickly quantify academic performance based on the number of citations received, my answer: we need the help of the wise now more than ever. The three crises that affected the world in the first 2 decades of the 21st century the globalization terrorism, the global financial crisis, and the recent health pandemic have shattered confidence and trust in a capacity of the current political, administrative system, large banking conglomerates, and of the military-industrial complex that gave rise and managed them. Following the failure of proposed solution predicated on the classical trial and error method in connecting to other similar problems, in creating a new context freed from the shattering experiences of the past, we might find a better answer than those attempting to repeat past mistakes for which nobody has yet claimed responsibility. The message Nizami Ganjavi gave us is that wisdom lies within us. Paradoxically, quick and easy access to an enormous body of knowledge has made people today unable to be the authors and directors of the script of their own lives, not even intelligent actors in its unfolding. From an early age, they are transformed into spectators of a world in which those that control the social networks, artificial intelligence, robotization, know more about us than we do ourselves. If we define wisdom as a means to use our knowledge to gain a superior understanding of things, we require that capacity of interiorization, which postmodern society has lost as a result of dehumanization, and which can help us uncover a causal relationship in unexpected contexts, such as which the COVID-19 pandemic suddenly and brutally thrust us in. One path for the deciphering of the inner nature of phenomena can lie in rediscovering the intuitive perspective the ancient Greeks dubbed noesis, an unexpected perception of the essence and significance of the world around us through the reconsecration of the sacred in the sphere of the profound. Can we be just the epiphany called for by the present times? Thank you.
Definitely. I hope that everyone enjoyed President Constantinescu's wisdom and his thoughts. We can open Dr. Ismail a floor for the screen for some comments, or we can take like a 30 minutes break and join a second panel. And Madam President, whatever you decide, co-chairs. Madam President, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Thank you, our dear Secretary General. I think that a few minutes to stretch our legs would be helpful, but whether we need half an hour break, Ismail, what is your thought on that?
Well, I just would ask if there is anybody. We have heard a lot of very, interesting comments, and if anybody has something that they're really eager to express right now, if not, then we can indeed give ourselves a little bit more time and start again in 30 minutes. But let's see first if there's anybody who is contacting the Secretary General with an urgent request to speak. So we wouldn't want to silence them. But if not, then I think we can move on and give ourselves 30 minutes.
Dr. Ismail and
Be
Madam,
precise, we reconvene at exactly what time?
we can reconvene in 25 minutes exactly.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, and see you in 25 minutes.
Shall we log out and then come back again?
Yes, it's the same login and it's the same passwords.
Okay.
Everything is the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.